writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Joni, author relations manager at Kobo Writing Life.
And I'm Rachel, promotion specialist at Kobo Writing Life.
Today's guest is Alison G. Bailey, who is an award-winning and international best-selling author living in Charleston, South Carolina. At an early age, she fell in love with writing, reworking scenes from her favorite TV shows and movies. Under the influence of a copious amount of Diet Pepsi and nonstop listening to Spotify, Alison writes unique emotional stories full of love, laughter, and romance.
And aside from the wonderful conversation we had with Alison about her career and about writing, the main takeaway that Joni and I have from this interview is that we need to visit Charleston, South Carolina as soon as possible. I have the Charleston website open on my laptop right now. If you have Charleston Recs, hit us up. We're planning a visit. But otherwise, we had a wonderful conversation with Alison. We talked about how she got started in indie publishing, kind of right when indie pub was becoming a thing back in 2013. And how her first book kind of just took off from word of mouth and inspired her to pursue a career in writing. We also talked about her background in theater and how that inspires her writing. We talked about her process, her latest release. It was a really fun conversation, and we hope you enjoy.
We are here today with Alison G. Bailey. Thank you so much for joining us, Alison.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So for any listeners that are unfamiliar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about you and the type of books that you write?
Well, I write mainly contemporary romance, new adult romance. I do have a couple of rom-coms, and I do have a YA romance. Then I have some other books that are like women's fiction.
And how did you get started with publishing? Were you always indie? Did you plan to publish independently from the beginning?
I've always been indie. Actually, I started this kind of on a fluke. I had been reading. And I haven't been a long time reader either. I probably started reading like real heavily 2012-ish. And I was in a book club group on Facebook. And there were some people in that group that they had started writing. I didn't know anything about indie. I didn't know what a beta reader was. I didn't know what a book blogger was. I was not in the book world. And I was talking to one of them just kind of by happenstance. And I had told her that when I was in college, I had written and directed some plays that I really enjoyed writing the plays. And I said, but I never thought about doing it like for a career or even writing books. And she said, well, why don't you give it a try since you enjoyed writing the plays? So I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. So I started about 3 times trying to write the book. And the 4th time, I actually kept writing the book. But I still didn't know if I was going to publish. That first book, every step, I decided what I was going to do when I got to that step. So it was like, I wrote it. Okay, now I get it edited. And my editor, at the time, I didn't realize that she was handing it off to a group of beta readers that she had. I got good feedback from that. So then I thought, well, I guess I need a cover. So I got the cover. And then I decided I might as well go ahead and publish it. So it came out in 2013. And it was just overwhelming. I don't know how the word got out about the book, because it was really big time word of mouth. But yeah, I had people messaging me that I didn't know, and I would get on Facebook and I would see like these long posts about the book and how people were crying while reading the book. And so it just kind of snowballed from there.
So after getting such like warm reception from your first book, which is always so exciting, what spurred you to keep writing and turn this into a career?
Well, there was a character from the first book that was a jerk in the first book, but I loved writing him. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a second book and make it his story. And I just, it was one of those things. I didn't even know I would write a second book. I think because the first book was so well received. Now, I also have my critics. People were they either loved the heroine in the first book, or they hated the heroine in the first book. So there was no gray area. So anyway, and it was successful and it sold. So I thought, well, I could make some money just sitting in my condo, coming up with stories. So, and I did enjoy the whole process once I got to the end of it. The reaction to the book was overwhelming. But like I said, I enjoyed the writing part and the research part that I had to do for certain things in the book.
So you really were right there at the beginning when self-publishing was just really taking off.
Yeah, the golden age.
Yeah. How do you find it compares to publishing today? Do you think it's more difficult to get started now that the market is saturated, or is it easier because there's so much information out there?
I think on one hand, it's easier for a writer to start because there is so much information. Back in 2012, 2013, it was basically, if you knew somebody that had written a book, then you'd ask them, or you found a group of authors on Facebook. I do think it's harder now because there are so many, especially in romance. And it's, like I said, it's harder to get seen. I think too, the ones that started back when I started, it was sort of a more organic readership that you got. There wasn't Instagram back then. It was mainly Facebook. And I think a lot of bloggers were getting started then. So that helped everyone. But yeah, I do. I don't know if I could do it today because of how hard it is to get seen. Not that it's impossible, but you just have to work harder at the marketing part.
Yeah, it's a different landscape. Did you do any marketing for that first book, or was it, as you said, mostly word of mouth and organic reach?
It was just organic. I didn't know. I did do a blog tour, but this was after it had been out for a little bit. And two big blogs at the time had picked up the book and read it and gave it good reviews. So I think it was just more word of mouth and people sharing. Sometimes, like now, I don't know if people like to talk about books like they used to. I was talking to a blogger last week, and she was saying too, she said, I miss the days when we just talked about the books. And I said, yeah. So like I said, I think today you'd have to be more focused on advertising, like Facebook ads, Amazon ads.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. But I will also say that it comes up again and again on this podcast that word of mouth is still, I think, the number one way that people find out about books and buy new books. And that's how I find out about books for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think you can't quite just put your book out into the world now. You got to do something.
I think if you do it word of mouth, I think it's good because usually that'll be somebody that maybe you know. And so, well, if they like it, it might be a friend or even someone you just know on Facebook.
Or librarians also, I think, do a lot of book recommendations.
Yeah.
So what does your marketing plan look like now? Because obviously it's had to change and adjust as the market changes. So how do you prepare for a book launch now?
Well, I have a publicist now, and we do sign-ups. We still do the cover reveal, make that a big deal. Of course, there's TikTok. We do that now. And so it's mainly trying to get new readers. We do like a art giveaway and reach out to new blogs and influencers. So it's really that, or do podcasts like this, to try and reach more readers and new readers.
How has your experience been with TikTok? We're hearing more and more about it on this podcast. So we're always interested.
Well, I'm going to confess to you. My niece do my TikTok.
That's exactly how you should do it, though. Like, those are the people that know about TikTok.
She's 26 and knows how to do everything.
That's awesome.
So, but even on, she just started doing that for me last month. And so I've noticed a difference. I am getting more followers and more likes, but I'm still a babe in the woods about that. I focus a lot on Instagram and then my reader group that I have on Facebook.
How does your reader group work? Is it like a book club, or is it more just people that are fans of your book that want to talk about them?
It started out as this lady that started it started out like a support group for that first book. And then it's grown into some people have, read all of my books. Some people are just finding me. Maybe I've done a takeover in a group and they want to know more about my books and stuff. So it's a little mix of everything.
Now, I just kind of want to take it back a little bit and talk about your writing process and how you got started. Because in your bio, you talk about how you started writing by reworking the dialogue and scenes of your favorite TV shows, and then you moved on to writing plays. So how has this kind of influenced how you approach writing books?
I think because I love doing the dialogue, and I see the book in my head before anybody else reads it. So I think that plays, that was my favorite part of plays, is doing dialogue. So I think that's, when I was a little girl, I would look at different shows and I would think in my head about being the main character. And I would change it to, for it to go this way or that way.
Can I ask which shows were the most influential on your writing?
Well, y'all are probably too young to remember this. But my number one show was The Bionic Woman.
It's a good show. It's a classic.
Well, see, I think it's a classic too. And the original Bionic Woman, I think they tried to bring her back a few years ago, and that didn't work.
That's a really fun writing exercise. Like, I think a lot of writers struggle with dialogue, or they find it the most challenging or maybe the most tedious part of writing. Do you have any tips for people about how to make dialogue really great and realistic?
I think you have to trust that the reader will find that rhythm in your dialogue. I know a lot of writers they think they need to put he said, she said, so readers know who's talking. And you do have to do that some. But I think, like I said, I think you should trust that the reader they will know. And write like people talk, I mean, I've read some things where I think people don't really talk like that. So
yeah, definitely. Do you read out loud, or do you go through any kind of process to see how it sounds?
I usually go back and have the computer read it, and I see how it is. Or I'll go over it in my head several times to try and get the rhythm of it. So it's weird when I've had audiobooks, because I hear it one way in my head, and then the narrator, for the most part, gets it. But there'll be some times where it's like, well, I wouldn't have said it that way.
And when it comes to your writing process of actually sitting down and writing the book, do you find that you tend to focus on dialogue first and then kind of fill in the rest? Or are you able to sit down and write out the whole book at once?
Usually how I start is I'll start with a subject matter that I'm interested in, or that I feel like needs to have a light shown on it. And then I'll sort of work the love story around that. And I go all over the place. Sometimes I start at the very beginning. Sometimes I just have sections of dialogue in another document. And I'll notate, okay, I want her to say this at this point. Sometimes I've started just writing scenes that I know I want to put in the middle of the book, or even go ahead and write the end of the book first.
So when you have all of these scenes in your head and then disparate scenes on paper, how do you bring them all together? Do you find you just write a whole bunch of scenes and that's your first draft? I'm so curious. I love talking about writing processes.
My first draft is a lot of junk. So it might be the narrative part, and I'll make a note. Well, I want it to end up like this, but I don't know yet, the details of how I want it to end up like this. So that first draft, I always have to go back. And when I go back, that's when, say, if I've written some dialogue, that's when I'll go and do my cut and paste and insert it where I want in the book. But yeah, that first draft is a glorious mess.
I think that's a sign of a good first draft, though. You want a nice, messy first draft to start off, right?
Yeah. And you might not find a lot of authors say this, but I love the editing process. Once I get it done, I'll do my self edits, go back and do that. And then I'll send it off to my editor. So when she sends it back to me, I love sitting there and seeing her notes. And it kind of inspires me to maybe parts of the book that were lacking that needed to go a little bit more in depth. It helps me think of things. And ultimately, I think it makes a better book that maybe I didn't think about when I was first writing it. But yeah, that's probably my favorite part of writing.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to fine tune and really perfect something that and make it exactly what you want to. And I think the editing process is kind of where all the magic happens.
Oh yeah.
How many drafts you usually go through from your first scenes to finished product?
Now I go through 4 drafts. I was trying to count. The first book I wrote, I think I wrote it 10 times. The goal is to get better the more you do it. So I've certainly learned in the 7-8 years that I've been doing it. So I don't have to do as many drafts as I used to.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where, you're going to get better at it and more efficient, but you're never going to be perfect at it. And that's part of the fun, right? It never stops being challenging.
You'll never learn everything. Mm-hmm. So I like taking different online webinars or classes, that things that it's like, well, I've been doing this for 8 years. I didn't know about that. So you're always learning.
Yes. And so because you're kind of genre agnostic, it's a lot of contemporary romance, but you've explored different genres within that. Do you think about the themes when you're going, I know that you write a lot about mother-daughter relationships and you have a lot of strong female characters. Where do you start? Is it plot that you start with? Or are you thinking these characters are in my head, I want to explore their relationship, or I want to talk specifically about this thing that's important to me?
Usually I start with, I want to talk about this thing that's important to me. And usually in the books I write, there's some part of my experience in my personal life that one of the characters will have. It might be one little thing, or it might be 2 little things, or the whole character might be based off of me. So I take certain things from my life and it's like, well, I'd like to explore that and build on it and just, see where it goes and fit the romance in there.
And when you're taking things from your personal life and inspired by your life, do you find it harder to go through the editorial process when it's something so close to you? Or do you find it's kind of therapeutic to barf it all out into a story?
I think the hardest part is when I'm actually writing it, before it goes to the editor. When I do the first draft and then I go back and do the second draft, which is just my edits, that's harder. By the time I get to my editor's notes and stuff, I think I've gotten all my emotions out. It is cathartic. I'm not a real talkative person, so a lot of my feelings, that's what's on the page.
And look, you said you start with the idea of what you want to talk about. At what point do you decide which genre you're going to be exploring that topic, whether it be YA, women's fiction, or romance?
Well, I don't really, I always hate categories because I feel like it holds you. Somebody might look and see, well, that's women's fiction. I don't read women's fiction. I really sit down and talk to my publicist and say, okay, well, this is, the book. Well, this is what happens in the book. These are the age of the characters. Well, then that needs to be new adult romance, or if they're older, contemporary romance. If the story is where you could take the romance part out of it and still have a story, that's more women's fiction.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that more and more, is that especially with indie authors, people don't really want to be siloed into these very specific categories, and there is more space to play around with it and just say, well, let's see what the story develops and see who wants to read it.
And I think indie authors, I think they can be more creative, try things more. If you're with a publisher, of course, the publisher is going to dictate to some degree what you're writing because they want to make sure it's something that they can market.
Exactly.
So indie authors, you don't have to approach subjects in a traditional way. You can just try it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but you at least get the chance to, sort of stretch your wings a little bit.
And I know you just said you're not crazy about categorizing and like narrowing it down, but is there a subgenre that you haven't explored yet in your writing that you would like to try your hand at some point?
I don't know. I've thought about, because I've read some like romantic suspense. I really like the books that I've read. So if I was going to try anything, it might be something like that I would go towards.
That would be a good challenge, I think, because there's so much about writing suspenseful novels that's different. Like you have to go and build the suspense, and you have to go back and drop clues in. And it always seems just a step too challenging.
Well, and you have to figure out at the end, you got to keep people, hanging for a while. So like I said, I admire authors that's what they write.
We'll look out for your next or your upcoming suspense novel.
Yeah.
And so your latest book on Kobo is Forever Perfect. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us a little bit about that book and about the Perfect series?
Well, it's the first book was Present Perfect. And so this is the next generation. So the daughter is the daughter of the couple in Present Perfect, and the son is the son from the couple in the second book. And of course they meet, they fall in love, but she's his sister's best friend. So he's a little leery about getting involved with that. And also there's animosity between the fathers, as she's very close to her dad. So there's some push and pull with that. It takes place here in Charleston on Folly Beach. It deals with a few serious topics, but I also try to put humor in my books. I don't think a person can only take so much drama. You got to have something to cut it up. But yeah, like I said, I had fun writing this book.
And the series is everything's kind of linked together, but each book can be read on its own, right?
Yeah, each book. I tried to write it so you get a little bit of backstory so the reader's not completely lost. Even with Forever Perfect, you get an understanding of why the fathers are like they are towards each other and just certain things. I don't think I have too many spoilers in that book. So you could go back and read the first book and be okay.
So how do you keep all that straight in your head when you're doing these kind of intertwined stories? Like, do you have some kind of schematic where you keep track of everything, or is it all in your brain?
I did have to go back and reread some things in Present Perfect and in Past Imperfect, because it's been a few years. And usually once the book is out, I don't read it unless I'm looking for, say, a quote for a teaser. I mean, I've had readers tell me certain lines from a book, and I'm thinking, I don't even know what book that's from. But yeah, it was a little hard getting back into that world with the parents because, they were younger in the initial books. But I treat it like anything else. And if I have a question about something, then, I have the books for reference. So, because, I've got some readers that have read Present Perfect and know it better than I know it.
Yeah, that's fun. When you have readers who are super fans of your book and know everything in the canon, it's a nice place to be.
I actually had in my reader group, there was a reader and she posted a quote. And then she said, "Oh, this is my favorite quote." And I looked at the quote and I was like, I think she's talking about a different author. I think she's at the books, confused. But I wasn't going to say anything in the group. Well, then another reader posted, "Well, what book is this from?" And they said, "Well, Past Imperfect." And I'm like, I don't even remember that.
That's really funny. Did I write this?
Or I've seen quotes that I think, man, that's a good quote. And then it's like, oh, well, that's from one of my books.
That's me, being wise. Love it. What do you think in your years in publishing, what is the best thing that you've done for your publishing business?
Gosh, that's a hard one.
I know. It's a big question.
I think what I did best, not at the very beginning, somewhere down the line, I started treating it like a business. And, there's the creative side and, that's all well and good. But once you publish, you do become a small business owner. And the first couple of years, I didn't really treat it that way. I kind of waited around. It's like, when will I come up with an idea? And so I think that probably was the main thing it's like, it is a business and you have to treat it like a business.
I think that's really solid advice because I think it's easy, especially when like writers are creators and readers, and sometimes it can be difficult to bring the business side into it and say, well, I'm doing my creative thing, I'm expressing myself, but also like I want this to be my full-time career. So you do need to figure that part of it out.
And I mean, if you're a creative and you have that business side to you, that's fantastic. I didn't, but yeah, you don't find a lot of creative people that are also business people. So,
what did you do before you were writing?
Well, I worked in theater. I was a theater major, so I did that right out of college. And then I did medical transcription.
Oh, no way. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So that's how I learned to type.
That's cool. And theater, Virgo, another very creative area to be in.
I love theater. There's nothing like going to a live performance, whether it's musical or straight play. I'm always in awe of, what people can do. It's like, there's no electronic manipulation or anything. It's just, that's how talented they are.
I'm a huge theater person, so I have to ask, do you have a favorite production that you've seen?
I have two, Wicked and Gypsy. Those are my two favorite musicals.
You have excellent taste.
So, thank you.
And you mentioned off the top that you weren't a huge reader until shortly before you became a writer. Do you still find time to read while you're writing, or when you're kind of in the zone and writing, do you leave books off to the side?
I don't read as much when I'm writing, but I do still read. And then once the book is finished, I'll go right back to my old reading self. So I think it's important for authors to read in their genre, whatever it is. It helps you. It might inspire you. It gives you flavor of other authors, what their voice is. But yeah, I do. I think that I don't see how you could be an author and not be a reader.
Yeah.
When you are reading while you're writing, do you still read in your genre? Or do you like to read romance, not when you're writing, so you're not influenced by somebody else's work?
I still read in the genre. I mean, my favorites are friends to lovers and enemies to lovers. Like I said earlier, I'm reading a few. I've read a few like romance suspense. But yeah, I still read in that.
I ask because we have had authors who are rabid romance readers, but once they start writing, they want to have only their work. So I always find it fascinating how different people's brains work when it comes to reading while writing.
My brain could not. I would get influenced, I think.
When I first started publishing and I was reading, I think I had more of a critical eye because I was writing too. But as the years have gone on, I can shut that writer part of me off and just enjoy a book as a reader.
I think that's so impressive that you're able to do that. I know Joni and I both have backgrounds in editorial, and sometimes it can be hard to shut that part of your brain off and be able to enjoy something. So it's always really impressive when people are able to do that.
Yeah.
And that leads us nicely into rapid fire book questions. Let's talk a little bit about what you've been reading. And for this one, you are welcome to substitute any book with a play or a show. Let's make it fun. Do you have a favorite book that you've read this year?
Yes. I love Marnie Mann. She was a new author to me starting last year.
She's been on this very podcast.
I know, I listened to her. She probably thinks I'm stalking her. But yeah, I read The Assistant. She is such a good writer and storyteller. Now, she's one that kind of keeps you with some of her books. She kind of keeps you on the edge. and you can't figure out what's going to happen until you get to the end.
We do love Marnie Mann on this podcast. She was a lovely guest. Do you have a go-to book recommendation when somebody asks you for a book rec? Do you have one that you're usually like, yes, you need to read this?
Probably The Bronze Horseman. And don't be scared that it's long, because I didn't read it for a long time because it was like a 700-page book. But man, that was a good book.
What was
all three of those books are good.
What was the name again?
The Bronze Horseman by Pauline and Simon. Yeah.
Okay. We will add that. And then you mentioned that your favorite trope is enemies to lovers or friends to lovers. Do you have a favorite book in that genre or in that story?
I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Okay. We're putting pressure on you.
I don't think that fast. That's why I'm not good at rapid fire.
That's okay.
Joni, I'm going off book on this question. But you mentioned that those were your favorite tropes. Are they also your favorite tropes to write?
Yeah, they are. Maybe the enemies a little bit more. Enemies to lovers. But yeah, they are my favorite ones to write.
Yeah, enemies to lovers tends to have a little more angst, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And next book on your to read list, do you have anything that you're waiting to read?
Not that I'm waiting to read, but I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm reading The Lawyer right now by Marnie Mann. So
awesome.
I don't know what'll be up next.
And what are you working on? What can readers expect from you next?
The next one is going to be a military romance, which I've never done before.
That's
called Pieces on the Ground. And it deals with PTSD. And the way the two characters meet is they are in a surf therapy group for veterans. And that's all I can tell you.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I like this concept. Was there a lot of research for you involved in writing about that?
Yeah, I did. I'm still researching. That's always one of the big things. And it could be some little thing that nobody else notices, but then I research it to make it accurate and right. So, I've been reading a lot of articles about female veterans that have come back and had PTSD.
And I'm curious, just because this has come up recently on podcasts, do you use trigger warnings when you're writing about sensitive topics? Do you like to give your readers a heads up, or is it kind of there in the blurb?
I used to not do it. I do it now, not on every book that I have to do it. But yeah, if there's a sensitive topic that's anywhere in the book, I'll put right there in the blurb that there's a sensitive subject matter. Mm-hmm. So you don't know nowadays. I mean, some people may look at that, and people go through so many different things. And so
you want to take care of your readers.
Yeah, you want it to ultimately be an enjoyable experience for them.
Definitely. Cool. So we will look out for that book coming soon. And where can readers find you online?
I'm everywhere. Facebook, Instagram. I've already talked about TikTok. And I'm Alison G. Bailey on all of them.
Perfect. And you like the Instagram. That's your happy place?
Yeah, you probably see me post mostly on Instagram.
Perfect. We'll include links to all of those and your books in the show notes. Thanks so much for doing this. This was really fun.
I appreciate you having me on. This was fun.
Yeah.
And that rapid fire wasn't too bad.
Not at all. One day we'll turn it around and let someone do it to me and Rachel and just see how we do.
That'll be a nightmare.
Then you'll know.
Segment.
Then you'll know what it feels like.
Exactly.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in picking up Alison's books, we will include links in our show notes. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. If you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com, and be sure you are following us on all of the socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and Twitter, and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram.
This episode is produced by Joni DiPlacido and Rachel Wharton. Our editor is Kelly Robotham. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker, and a big thank you to Alison G. Bailey for being our guest today. If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey, you can sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.